My name is Chris Watts. I'm doing my communication speech for Brenda Armentrout, and welcome to Broomfield, Colorado. About 70 degrees, and it's awesome outside, so welcome. I'm doing my speech on relationship deterioration and repair, and this is my PowerPoint to help me. Deterioration. The relationship begins to fall apart, crumble, or fail. You have weakening bonds. You get bored of the everyday routine, and you get distractions such as work, hobbies, relationships, no matter how harmless, even at the job. You might meet a new person, and it could strengthen into something else, and could weaken the bond you have with the partner you have. You spend less time with each other, and sometimes you have no time to maintain the relationship. Sometimes in a relationship, you maybe make promises that can turn into a major betrayal, or minor arguments that could turn into things where you could say spiteful comments, which turn into bigger problems. The first phase of deterioration is interpersonal dissatisfaction, which when you become unhappy with all the everyday interactions with you and your partner. You also begin to view your future with your partner as a negative future. And the second phase is interpersonal deterioration, which you start to grow farther and farther apart. And you share less of your free time with each other. You have more awkward silences at dinner, or when you're just out by yourself, you don't talk at all. You disclose less of your feelings, and you show less affection toward each other. When you have good communication, you show more nonverbal communication, which is the majority of the messages we send, like through gestures, facial expressions, eye contact.
Welcome to The Hidden Verdict, the channel where every case pulls you further into the unknown. Hit subscribe and step with us into the darkest corners of the human mind.
It didn't start in the early hours of a Colorado morning. It didn't begin with a missing persons report, flashing police lights, or a husband standing in front of cameras begging for his family to come home. The story everyone thinks they know about Chris Watts began long before Shanann Watts ever walked into his life. And if you listen closely, you can hear it. In the silence, in the obedience, in the man who learned early on how to disappear without anyone noticing. Chris Watts was not loud. He was not aggressive. He wasn't the kind of man people warned others about. He was the kind you forgot was even in the room. From childhood, he learned that being good meant being quiet, agreeable, and invisible. Conflict made him uncomfortable, so he avoided it. Anger frightened him, so he swallowed it. And over time, that silence became his identity. To the outside world, this looked like stability, reliability, the kind of man parents trusted and neighbors praised. But inside, something else was forming, a pressure with no release, a life lived on autopilot. No one asked what he wanted, and more importantly, he never learned how to say it. If you're already feeling uneasy, that's not an accident. Stories like this don't announce themselves. They creep in slowly. And if you want to follow where this truly leads, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to The Hidden Verdict, because what comes next isn't about headlines. It's about what we miss when we're not looking closely enough. As Chris grew older, he perfected the art of compliance. He became whoever he needed to be in order to be accepted. On the surface, it looked like maturity. In reality, it was erasure. A man without a voice doesn't lose his anger, he stores it. And stored emotions don't fade. They ferment. Before there was a marriage, before there were children, before there was a crime that would shock the world, there was a man who never learned how to confront his own reflection. And when someone lives their entire life avoiding confrontation, the reckoning doesn't disappear. It waits.
up until he was 17. And he was in basketball, he was in baseball, he was in football, and loved NASCAR. He and his dad went to the NASCAR races all the time. Loved sports, and he was a good kid. Had two best friends, and that's who he grew up with, and still are friends with them today. And there's nothing that would have predicted any of this could have ever happened.
Yeah.
Nothing in his childhood at all. I would have never in a million years thought something like this could happen to him at all.
You didn't see things like him getting into fights? Or...
No fighting. He was quiet, and he got along with people, and he didn't start anything, and he was...
As Chris Watts moved into adulthood, the pattern didn't change, it sharpened. He became the man no one questioned, the one who never pushed back, never raised his voice, never caused discomfort. Friends described him as calm, easygoing, dependable. Employers trusted him. Family members saw him as steady. On the surface, he was everything a good man was supposed to be. But beneath that image was a dangerous misunderstanding. Silence was mistaken for peace. Chris learned that approval came from compliance. Say yes. Don't argue. Don't reveal too much. Over time, this turned into a way of surviving relationships rather than participating in them. He didn't express needs because he didn't know how. He didn't set boundaries because that risked rejection. Instead, he adapted, constantly reshaping himself to fit the expectations of whoever stood in front of him. When he met Shanann, that instinct went into overdrive. She was confident, expressive, decisive, everything he was. To Chris, this felt like relief. He didn't have to lead, he didn't have to decide, he just had to follow. And at first, that felt like love. People around them saw balance. They saw a strong woman and a supportive man. What they didn't see was how completely Chris disappeared inside that role. Inside, resentment began quietly accumulating. Not explosive, not obvious, just a slow, constant pressure. He smiled through discomfort. He nodded through frustration. Each unspoken thought stacked on top of the last. If you've ever known someone who seemed fine no matter what life threw at them, pause here and drop a comment, because this is often where the most dangerous stories begin. Chris wasn't planning violence. He wasn't imagining destruction. But he was living a life that didn't feel like his own. And when a person believes they have no voice, no exit, and no control, they don't confront the problem. They fantasize about escape. This was the version of Chris Watts the world trusted. The man who never argued. The man who never complained. And sometimes, the people who never speak are the ones you should listen to most closely, because what they're not saying is building towards something they don't yet understand themselves.
And could weaken the bond you have with the partner you have. You spend less time with each other, and sometimes you have no time to maintain the relationship. Sometimes in a relationship, you maybe make promises that can turn into a major betrayal, or minor arguments that could turn into things where you could say spiteful comments, which turn into bigger problems. The first phase of deterioration is interpersonal dissatisfaction, which when you become unhappy with all the everyday interactions with you and your partner. You also begin to view your future with your partner as a negative future. And the second phase is interpersonal deterioration, which you start to grow farther and farther apart. And you share less of your free time with each other. You have more awkward silences at dinner, or when you're just out by yourself, you don't talk at all. You disclose less of your feelings, and you show less affection toward each other. When you have good communication, you show more nonverbal communication, which is the majority of the messages we send, like through gestures, facial expressions, eye contact, the tone of your voice. And there's many types of forms of communication these days, and it's the most successful groundwork for relationships. A few quotes that I've done research on from Elaine Schoenberg: all relationships problems stem from poor communication skills, which is very true. And another quote from Schoenberg and Sorjan: you can't communicate while you're checking your BlackBerry, watching TV, or flipping through sports section, which is very true. With technology nowadays, you'll be on your iPhone, your BlackBerry, at a restaurant, and you'll see two people at a table, and you'll see both of them on their phones, either Facebook comment, status, or maybe playing a game. And there's no communication at all.
By the time Chris Watts settled into married life, the cracks were already there. They were just hidden behind smiles, routines, and carefully curated moments. From the outside, the Watts family looked like a modern success story. Shanann was vibrant and outspoken, sharing their lives openly, celebrating milestones, projecting happiness. Chris stood beside her quietly, always present, always supportive. To most people watching, it looked like partnership. What it really was contrast. As responsibilities grew, so did the weight Chris carried silently. Financial strain crept in. Expectations multiplied. Decisions were made around him rather than with him, and each time he agreed without protest, the distance inside him widened. He didn't argue. He didn't object. He absorbed. And absorption, when it has no outlet, becomes something far more dangerous than anger. Social media told one story. Reality whispered another. Behind closed doors, Chris felt unseen, unheard, and increasingly detached, not just from Shanann, but from himself. He began to retreat inward, emotionally checking out while physically remaining present. To Shanann, he was still there. To the world, he was still the dependable husband. But internally, he was drifting. Then came the affair, not as the beginning of darkness, but as a mirror held up to everything missing inside him. For the first time, Chris felt noticed without expectations, heard without responsibility, alive without confrontation. It wasn't love, it was contrast, a fantasy where he didn't have to explain himself or suppress who he was pretending to be. If you're following this unraveling, take a moment to like and share this story, because understanding how illusion works is just as important as understanding the crime itself. The affair didn't create a monster. It revealed a fracture. Suddenly, the life Chris had quietly endured felt unbearable by comparison. The man who never spoke now had a secret where he felt powerful. And once a person discovers escape without accountability, returning to reality feels impossible. This is where the smiles became masks. This is where silence became strategy. And this is where the line between fantasy and responsibility began to blur, setting the stage for choices that could never be undone.
I gotta censor this fella. You serious?
Ice, ice. The kids are thrilled with your birthday present.
Oh, yeah, definitely wearing this. Are you serious?
Serious.
Hell yeah! Oh my goodness!
Cece got our ice.
June 7th. Oh my goodness, I gotta take that day off and the day after off. Hell yeah!
By the time Chris Watts reached this point, there was no single moment that pushed him over the edge. There was no explosion, no dramatic argument that changed everything. Instead, there was a quiet decision forming in the dark, a decision built from avoidance, fantasy, and fear of exposure. The life he had been living felt like a trap, and the life he imagined felt like freedom. Between the two, he chose not confrontation, but erasure. Chris didn't see himself as a man capable of cruelty. In his mind, he was cornered, overwhelmed, desperate for escape. He told himself that ending one life would somehow solve everything else. It was a dangerous distortion, one born from emotional detachment and years of suppressed accountability. Responsibility didn't feel real to him anymore, only obstacles did. Lies became easier than honesty. Silence became a weapon. Each day he rehearsed normalcy while internally preparing for disappearance. The man who once avoided conflict now avoided reality itself. And as the gap between who he was and who he pretended to be widened, so did the choices available to him shrink. If this story is forcing you to sit with uncomfortable truths, take a moment to subscribe and like this video. These aren't easy stories, but they're necessary ones, because they reveal how harm can grow without noise. On the final night, nothing about the house looked different. No shattered objects, no raised voices reported, just quiet, the most terrifying kind. What happened next wasn't fueled by rage but by detachment. Chris acted with a chilling calm that shocked even those trained to investigate violence. This wasn't loss of control, it was the absence of connection. This was the point of no return. The moment fantasy demanded permanence. And when someone chooses escape over responsibility, they don't just destroy others, they erase themselves. By morning, the man who once hid in silence had created a silence that could never be undone. After the confessions, the court proceedings, and the life sentence, the world searched for closure in verdicts and headlines. But the truth is, the legal ending was the simplest part of this story. The harder question remains: how did someone so ordinary become capable of something so final? The answer isn't found in a single moment of violence. It's buried in years of avoidance, emotional absence, and a life lived without accountability. Chris Watts didn't collapse under rage. He collapsed under the weight of never confronting himself. He spent his life adapting, complying, and disappearing, until the idea of facing consequences felt more terrifying than destroying everything around him. That doesn't excuse what he did. It explains the path that led there. And understanding that path matters because this story is not as rare as we want to believe. The true verdict isn't just that Chris Watts is guilty. It's that silence can be deadly. That emotional detachment, when normalized, can rot a person from the inside out. That a life built on performance instead of honesty will eventually demand a reckoning. If this story made you think differently about the people around you, or even about yourself, leave a comment below. These conversations matter, and if you believe stories like this should be examined beyond surface-level headlines, make sure you're subscribed to The Hidden Verdict and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. This didn't start with Shanann. It started with a man who never learned how to speak, how to confront, or how to take responsibility for his own inner world. The tragedy is not only what he did, but how long it went unnoticed. And that is the hidden verdict. Monsters don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they are built quietly, over time, by what we ignore, excuse, and fail to question until it's too late.
I've been a judicial officer now for starting my 17th year, and I could objectively say that this is perhaps the most inhumane and vicious crime that I have handled out of the thousands of cases that I have seen. And nothing less than a maximum sentence would be appropriate. and anything less than the maximum sentence would depreciate the seriousness of this offense. So the court is going to sentence Mr. Watts as follows. With regard to count number 1, murder in the first degree as it relates to Shanann Watts, the court is going to sentence you, sir, to a life sentence in the Colorado Department of Corrections, followed with no possibility of parole. And that is going to run consecutively to all but counts 3 and 4. With regard to count 2, as it relates to murder in the first degree with Bella, the court is going to sentence you to life in the Colorado Department of Corrections with no possibility of parole. With regard to count number 3, the court is going to sentence you as it relates to Celeste to life in the Colorado Department of Corrections with no possibility of parole. With regard to counts 4 and 5 relating to Bella and Celeste as a different theory of first-degree murder, the court is going to sentence you to life in the Colorado Department of Corrections, and legally those sentences must run concurrently as a different theory of first-degree murder. Recognizing the unlawful termination of pregnancy for the unborn child that has been named Nico, the court absolutely believes that the maximum sentence of 48 years would be appropriate to run consecutive to the other charges, with an additional mandatory parole period of 3 years as set forth by statute. With regard to count number 7, as it relates to tampering with a deceased body, as well as counts 8 and 9, each a class 3 felony, the court is going to impose a maximum sentence of 12 years each for those counts to run consecutively to the other counts. The court is going to order that the statutory fees be paid and court costs. The court's going to grant the prosecution 91 days to file a notice of restitution, and that will be the sentence of the court.